Hey, welcome back everybody. So this is the next segment of the 305 build. I did quite a bit of stuff off of camera, so I kind of want to walk you through some of that. I didn't really get into too much detail about it because it's really simple stuff. I didn't want to insult your intelligence by explaining to you, how to put a hose on. So just let me walk you real quickly through what we did here. So on the bottom end of the engine, we put the oil pump on. One thing that I did do off camera, or didn't really get into detail, was I took the oil pump apart and inspected the internal components of the pump, and this pump looks pretty good. It looks fairly new. There's also a pressure relief valve in the pump here. I took this out and made sure that passageway was clean. There's a spring and a little valve in there. There was a little bit of crud in there, so I wanted to take this pump apart. You don't have to do this, especially if you get a new pump. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any sludge or crud in here, and this pump looked really good. And I did run all these parts through the parts washer and final wash them in soap and water. So one thing I noticed is, and I scraped most of it off here, but whoever did this before had silicone gasket sealer on this pickup screen where it connects to the pump right here. That is a big no-no. Don't ever use gasket sealer anywhere near this pump. Some of these have a gasket that go here, and some of them actually just go metal to metal, like a lot of the GM stuff. They just do metal to metal here, and it seems to seal up pretty good. So no silicone gasket sealer here. But if you want to, you can take the pump apart. It's pretty simple to do so, or you can just replace the pump. This pump looks really good, so we're going to go ahead and use it. On this particular pump, we did have a gasket in our gasket set, and again, so we've got this pump assembled. It's always a good idea to put some clean engine oil inside this thing when you assemble it. You don't want these parts dry if you're going to assemble the pump. Even if you get a new pump, it's a good idea to prime the pump, put it in some oil. And of course we're going to prime this in the engine, but we did have a gasket in our gasket set, and these parts have all been cleaned. It's also a good idea to have a machine shop vat clean in hot acid these parts. These parts have to be completely clean. Taking them to the car wash or washing them in your kitchen sink is not going to cut it. So this gasket basically goes here, and then your pickup screen is going to go on there like that. So it's pretty straightforward, and you got a couple of bolts in it. Just make sure you torque these bolts when you get this on. We also have a gasket. We put our gasket on here and got these torqued on. And there's also a gasket in your set from the block to the pump housing itself. And then these are the bolts that came out of it. This is kind of a special bolt. It has a shoulder on it. And you need to make sure you use these bolts to put this pump onto the block. So your pump is going to mount onto the block like that. Now it's really important to make sure that all these bolts are torqued. Not just the housing the block bolts, which is important, but also make sure that these bolts up here are torqued correctly, and also your pickup screen. If any air gets sucked in between this plate or between this pickup or even here, you're going to have an engine failure. Actually, I've done some engines in the past where this plate here actually came loose because they didn't have these bolts tight, and it sucked air in and it wiped the motor out. So just make sure your pump is on correctly and everything is torqued, so you don't have any problems with oil starvation. So after that, we put the oil pan on. The oil pan's really straightforward, just like any other engine. Another good practice here, now we've got our pump on and we're getting ready to put our pan on. Another good practice is go over and make sure all the bolts are torqued on your mains and your rods, and I've done that. And also your pins down here, you can see that piston pin. It's always a good idea to oil those pins. Take some assembly lube and make sure you get oil on those pins. Now we oiled these when we put them together, but we want to make sure that we lube up those piston pins really good to make sure they're not dry. Once you're confident that everything down on the lower end of the motor is torqued and all your specs are right, your oil pump is on, all the bolts are torqued, you got some oil in there to prime it, then you can go ahead and put your gasket on. I don't use lots of large amounts of silicone on this, just a little in a few spots to hold it in place. Also, make sure that your oil pan is clean. Ran our pan through the hot tank, the hot wash, and final washed it, and it is ready to go on. And basically, it's just a matter of laying your pan on there and getting your bolts in it and torque them to spec in sequence, and you're ready to rock and roll. I also put the balancer and the hub assembly on the front and torque the bolt. We put the fuel pump on, torque the bolts to spec. I did end up getting a new crossover or bypass hose here because the other one was toasted, so we got that on. We got the thermostat housing on. I got a new water pump for it. Now the water pump, so it was kind of an interesting story about the water pump. I went to a local auto parts store, and I won't really name them, but their initials are Auto Z. So I walk in, and the girl behind the counter, and nothing against her, I'm sure she's doing the best she can. I told her I need a water pump for a 305 GMC V6. She gets into an argument with me about the fact that a 305 is a V8. And I said, well, I was nice. I told her, I said, yes, they do have 305 V8s, but this is a 305 V6. And she just would not get off of that. She's telling me that she has a 305 in her car, and she knows that a 305 is a V8. Man, I tell you, she was like raising her voice and stuff at me. And she looked like she was maybe 15 years old. I'm sure she was older than that, but I'm telling you, some of the people that they got working at these auto parts stores, man, it's sad, And I finally had to get her manager over there, and he looks me in the eye and tells me, no, a 305 is a V8. We finally looked it up, and they discovered that there is a 305. And surprise, guess what? They didn't have anything I needed. So I went down the road to another parts store, which is called O'Reilly's, which, to my surprise, O'Reilly's actually had a bunch of parts for this motor, so it worked out good. They had the water pump. They had the oil filter, the canister type filter made by Wix. That's the other thing. At the first store I went to, we looked up, even under the V6 heading, they're showing pictures of 305 small block Chevy V8 filters. I recognized the pictures, and I said, that's not the right filter. And they said, well, that's the one that lists for it. I don't care. I've got the canister filter right here. So I don't know. It was just, it's sad what's happening with these stores. But anyway, so I got the pump on, got the all of this stuff on the front, and also the valve covers are just sitting here. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through valve adjustment. I've also got the distributor set in, so this thing's getting close. But right now what we want to do is I want to kind of walk you through the valve adjustment, because there's a few steps you got to take. So let's get to that. So now this engine has a solid lifter camshaft in it, and what that means is that there's an adjustment. There's an adjuster on the rocker arm, and these have to be adjusted with lash, and you got to use a feeler gauge to do it. So let me show you how that's done. First of all, what you want to do, now let's say we'll just go ahead and adjust this one here because these are not adjusted. The thing is, in order to adjust these right, the piston has to be at top dead center on the compression stroke for that cylinder, and that way both of your valves are closed. So both of the valves have to be off of the base, or off of the lobe rather, on the base circle to where the valves are closed. And if you bring your piston up to top dead center on the compression stroke, both of the valves will be closed or on the base circle, and that's what you're after. All right, guys, so you're going to need a set of feeler gauges. These are feeler gauges. Now, I looked up the specification for these, the lash on here, because it's a solid lifter cam, there's a lash in here, or a clearance. It's 12 on the intake and 18 on the exhaust. So what you want to do is you want to take your feeler gauges and find your 12 thousandths gauge and your 18 thousandths. So there's my 12, and then we'll go up to 18, and we'll get both of those, and we're in business. So there's 12 and 18 here. So I got my 12, I got my 18, and I'm going to use that to adjust these. Now, before you do that, you can see that right here, this valve is open. That's not going to fly. So what I do is I rotate the engine to where I am not on the cam. And if you watch your intake valve, which is this one here, the intake valve is going to open and then it's going to close. After the intake valve closes, the piston will be coming up on TDC. So you want to watch this one open and close, and after that, just look in your spark plug hole, and it's easy on this motor because the holes are right here, and then you just bring your piston up to TDC and you're there. So let's do that. So right now my exhaust valve is open, so I got a little ways to go here. So there's my exhaust valve. It's opening all the way, and it's going to close. Now when I get up toward the end of the exhaust stroke here, you're going to notice that the intake is going to start to open. There's a point here where they're both open at the same time. That's called overlap. That is not where you want to adjust this. So there it goes. You see that? This one's still moving up. That one's moving down. Right there you're in overlap. So now my intake is opening. The piston's traveling down in the cylinder, drawing air and fuel in. Then my intake valve is going to close. You'll see it start to close. There it goes. Once my intake valve closes, now my piston is on its way up, and I am compressing the mixture in that cylinder. Okay, so my piston's on its way up right now. I'm going to get a flashlight and look down in this cylinder. So if we look down in our hole now, we can see that our piston just came up and it's sitting right there. It's at the highest point of travel. If I keep going with the rotation, it starts to go down. So I brought it back a little bit. So we're right at TDC with our piston, and now we should be able to adjust these valves. Back on these rockers is 12 on the intake and 18 on the exhaust. Now let me show you how we do that. We're going to back these off, make sure we got more than enough clearance. So this is clearance right here. You see how that thing's moving and you can hear it? And that's another reason why, like solid lifter cams, when the engine's running, especially when they're cold, the valve train's a little noisy. You can hear it clattering because they're always running with lash like this. So they do a little bit of clatter when the engine is running is normal. Okay, so we have our exhaust valve here. So I'm going to take my 18 thousandths gauge and I'm just going to slide it in there between the valve. Now it's going in easy. Even with the gauge in there, I still have some lash. We got to get rid of that lash. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this down with my gauge in there until it snugs it up. You can see the gauge is still loose. And these are pretty hard to turn. They're designed to be self-locking so they don't back off. So you got to put some effort into it. Okay, so my gauge is tight now. Now, the best way to get 18, this is 18 here, the best way to get that is to pull on this gauge. Now don't rip it out of there because I could pull it out of there. But put some tension on this, pull this gauge this way, because right now, if it's in there too tight, the lash is probably a little too tight. So you want to pull out on this gauge, and then you just back this off slowly until the gauge pulls out. See, I've got tension on this gauge, I'm pulling on it. So I'm going to back this off just a little bit at a time, and as soon as this pulls out of there, that's where I want to stop. There it goes. Okay, so now I have 18 thousandths right there. That's my 18 thousandths gap. You go over to the intake, you do the same thing, except we want 12 thousandths on this one, which is a different gauge. So, and again, see, with the gauge in there, we still have some lash, so we got to tighten this thing up. So we'll run this in until this gauge gets tight. Okay, my gauge is tight in there. Now I'm going to put tension on it again. I'm going to pull toward me, and I'm going to back this rocker off until that 12 thousandths just slides out of there. There it goes. Okay. Now if I put it in, I can feel just a little bit of tension there, and the same thing on this one. I can feel just a little bit of slight tension on it. So 18 and 12. You can do that same procedure for all of them. Now here's the thing. If you want to do this the simplest way possible, let me explain it to you. Okay, so this is the firing order of the engine. 165432. So on a V6, what that means is that another one of these cylinders is going to fire, and it's going to be the next cylinder in the firing order. So after I've adjusted my number 1 rockers, the next cylinder in the firing order is 6, right? So that's going to bring this piston up to top dead center compression, and I can adjust these just like I did the number 1. And you can go through the entire firing order like that. Alright guys, so I needed the room because I got a bunch of other engines I need to build. But that's pretty much it. I mean, as you can see, I've got everything pretty much buttoned up on here. I still have to add the motor mounts. I'm probably going to have to, I got the run stand here. I'm probably going to have to fabricate some special mounts or something for this, but that's okay. I got angle iron and a welder, so it's not a big deal. But it's pretty much ready to run. The only thing I'm waiting on now is the carburetor. So as soon as I get the carburetor, which it's on its way, we're going to get this thing on the run stand and fire up, and that'll be our next video. So that's it for this time. I appreciate you watching. Be sure to ask any questions below. Like this video, subscribe, and go to my Patreon site and support me. I'm asking for monthly pledges so we can do some cool builds. So I appreciate that. For all of you that have pledged support, I really appreciate you. Thank you. And the next time you see this baby, it's going to be in the run stand, and we'll try to make it roar. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you. We'll see you next time.